Brian Lehrer on WNYC, and we're going to end today with a call-in for anyone who describes yourself as queer. What does the word signify to you, and do you consider your sexual orientation or gender identity to be a choice? 212-433-WNYC, call or text. I asked because of a New York Times op-ed last week by a gay married activist named Matthew Vines, author of a book called God and the Gay Christian, The Biblical Case in Support of Same-Sex Relationships. His article was called I'm Gay, Not Queer, It Matters. And his basic argument was that as more people describe themselves as queer, it's contributing to an erosion in support for same-sex marriage. I'll read an excerpt in a second. But the question, the invitation, is for any of you who do use that word. It's a call-in for anyone who describes yourself as queer. What does the word signify to you? And do you consider anything about your sexual orientation or gender identity to be a choice? 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. Call or text. And you'll hear, as I read from the article, why the question of whether you consider your identity or orientation a choice is so relevant here. Here's part of Matthew Vines' concern in his Times op-ed, and it relates to the idea of it ever being a choice. He writes, quote, "The broad support that made marriage equality possible has grown more vulnerable. This is in part because a key message behind it, that being gay is not a choice, is being undermined by those who argue that same-sex orientation is better thought of as part of a wider rebellion against social norms. A wider rebellion against social norms. This worldview," he writes, "is best expressed in one word, queer, which is often used interchangeably with gay these days. The two words don't mean the same thing," he writes, "and in that difference lies a danger for our hard-fought equality," unquote. So listeners, if you are gay or lesbian or bisexual, do you ever describe yourself as queer? Do you use the Q interchangeably with the L, the G, or the B? And do you consider anything about your sexual orientation or gender identity to be a choice as opposed to who you are inherently? And that's the basis for not being discriminated against. 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692, call or text. More from the Matthew Vines op-ed, quote, "I came out as gay," he writes, "in 2010 after being raised in an evangelical church in Wichita, Kansas, where homosexuality was considered a sinful choice. Two things helped me change my mind. First was a painstaking study of Scripture. All 6 of the Bible's references to same-sex relations are negative, but the lustful and exploitative same-sex practices those passages describe differ fundamentally from same-sex marriages today that are based on lifelong love and commitment." He continues, "The other thing that shaped my view was the public argument for gay rights at the time. The message from leading marriage equality advocates was simple and clear. Being gay is neither chosen nor changeable, and gay people deserve the same legal protections and chance at happiness as everyone else." And he writes, "The shift toward queer has been remarkable and has coincided with a broader shift toward polarization in our society over the past 15 years. He writes, "In 2009, a majority of gay men and lesbians reported negative feelings about queer, with only about 1 in 5 gay men viewing it positively. As a result, gay rights leaders and allies largely avoided it. But in 2025, 48% of LGBTQ people said they thought of themselves as queer, including nearly 60% of those under 30, unquote. So listeners, maybe this is a generational thing. If you are younger or older in any of the LGBTQ categories, maybe you have a take on that. But the specific invitation here is for anyone who describes yourself as queer. This is for you. What does the word signify to you? Do you consider your sexual orientation or gender identity a choice? And if you've been around for a while, maybe an older millennial or up on this generational question, has your relationship to the word changed? over time. 212-433 WNYC. One more stretch from the op-ed. He writes, what's in a word? It's more than just a shift in linguistic fashion. Queer carries an adversarial charge that gay does not, and that charge has a specific intellectual lineage. And he goes into the 1990 activist group called Queer Nation, which published a manifesto that he says exhorted gay people to call themselves queer. Its rationale was that gay was a much brighter word and that queer better conveyed the anger and disgust they felt at how society treated gay people as marginal others. So you get the question. It's an invitation for those of you who use the word queer to describe yourself with the baked-in sub-question based on the article: do you consider your sexual orientation or gender identity a choice? And does it signify a broader rebellious politics that you have rather than simply who you turned out to be? Agree, disagree, or engage how you will with this New York Times op-ed by Matthew Vines, the article called I'm Gay, Not Queer, It Matters, 212-433. WNYC will take your calls and texts right after this. Brian Lehrer on WNYC. Now to your calls and texts on what the word queer means to you. If you use that word to describe yourself, whether you consider your sexual orientation or gender identity a choice in any way, and does queer signify a broader rebellious politics rather than simply who you turned out to be? And do you think, as the author posits, that the growing identification with queer threatens even the same-sex marriage Supreme Court ruling, which some would like to see overturned? Jessica in Montclair, you're on WNYC. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
So I identify as queer, and I don't see it as a choice for me. It's mostly just I'm not straight. So it's sort of like an umbrella. I don't identify as straight. I'm not a lesbian. I'm queer in my sexuality and in lifestyle. And I think it's sort of, for me, it's just like an openness. I'm not straight.
Jessica, thank you very much for starting us off. Perna in Harlem, you're on WNYC. Hello, Perna.
Hi, I'm one of those boomers. I'm 70 years old, and I've been calling myself queer since the very early 90s. Admittedly, only in queer spaces then, now pretty much in every space. I think you can be gay and not queer, and you can be gay and queer. For me, queer is, I would challenge that queer is rebellion. It's just a distinction. I'm half Indian. When I say I'm South Asian, I'm not rebelling against Western culture, but I'm saying I'm not conforming 100% to it. So I think saying that I'm queer is saying the same thing. I'm not conforming with all those standards. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. And fear that there'll be a backlash is not a reason not to question standards.
Perna, thank you very much. Couple of texts. Listener writes, I'm a gay man who identifies as queer intentionally as a political statement. My right to marriage means nothing if the rights of trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people are not also recognized. So putting himself under that bigger umbrella, as the first caller also described it, as queer. Another text, I describe myself as queer, but I also identify as trans and non-binary. I describe myself as gay as well as queer, but I find that saying queer is more digestible to the broader cis straight public, just the opposite of what the op-ed writer thinks the way it lands is. Listener writes, I just got married to my wife, who's a trans woman. In the eyes of this broader community, it probably looked like a straight marriage between two weirdos, but to me, it was a big gay wedding, writes that listener. Robert in Brooklyn, you're on WNYC. Hi, Robert. Thanks for calling in.
Thanks for having me. I'm a 50-year-old Caribbean gay guy, and we have been grown up and sort of brought up that queer was very abnormal, even worse than gay. So for me, I never identify as queer. I always identify as gay. Over time, I'm getting more accustomed to it, but queer really resonates in the Caribbean community as very, what you should not be. So I'm not comfortable with that term for myself. what you mentioned with the article, I think in terms of heteronormativity, in terms of evangelical, that gays need to be in this relationship, and that's the problem. I think that is worrisome, and that's not what we should be looking towards. But queer really means different things to different cultures. Thank you for taking my comment.
Thank you very much for making it. Crystal in Brooklyn, you're on WNYC. Hi, Crystal. We have about 30 seconds for you.
All right. Well, I was saying to the screener that the first time I identified as queer was actually in the pages of Time Out New York. I was in their singles issue back in May 2011, and they only gave me the option of identifying as gay, straight, or queer. And at the time, I wasn't publicly out. So I had to say, okay, I was still kind of making decisions about, and I knew I wasn't straight, but I wasn't sure if I was gay. So I got queer. That was what I was, in the pages of Time Out all across the city. And I would say if people ask my sexuality, I identify as bisexual, but I am queer. And I think that's how a lot of people feel. It's kind of an overarching umbrella. And then
And I'm going to leave it there just because I want to get one other person on. I think your thought was very clear. Call us again, Crystal. And Ford in Jackson Heights, you're going to get our last word in about 30 seconds for you. Hey there.
Hey, Brian, thanks for taking the call. I was saying to your screener that, I came out in high school back in 1990. The only word that I had for myself then was lesbian, but I also knew that there was something else, and I didn't encounter the word transgender until about 6 years later when I encountered Leslie Feinberg and Minnie Bruce Pratt. I read that op-ed, and the reason that I use the word queer is because we have such strict lines around gender, sex, and sexual orientation. I have only ever been attracted to women, but I am transgender. Am I supposed to call myself straight? In my eyes, no,
Again,
I'm
the
queer.
big umbrella, right? And that's going to be the last word for it. And everybody, thank you for your calls and texts. Really interesting and important.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.
The United States is about to mark its 250th anniversary.
And so, on the Global Story podcast from the BBC, we're telling surprising tales of American influence on the world stage and in ordinary people's lives all across the globe.
We have this ability to export our story, and a lot of people have bought it.
I feel like the American dream is alive but not well.
From the BBC, it's the United States at 250.
Listen wherever you get your podcasts or find us on YouTube.